Hi, this is Kevin Trainer, and I'd like to welcome you to my tutorial on the authoring of the non-functional requirements section of a systems analysis document. If you've been following along with my previous tutorials, before we've gotten to this point, we have created a use case diagram for our system. And the system that we are working with is called the attendance system. And it's a little system that we use to keep track of the attendance of my students in my classes at the university. And so what I have up here is the use case diagram for the system so we can see the extent of it. And this is a pretty small version of the system. So we've got 3 pages to the use case diagram, student-facing use cases, instructor-facing use cases, and administrative use cases. Okay, and let's just go through the student-facing ones. The student, having logged in, should be able to log attendance and should be able to generate a student version of the attendance report. Okay, and that's all that students are able to do. The instructor can do a lot more. I created this for me. So the instructor can create a semester in the system, create a class, enter the class meeting schedule, enter the class roster, enter the class meeting password, which is my trick for making sure that you can't log your attendance unless you're actually there, generate a class attendance report, and generate a semester attendance report. Okay, and then we have a couple of administrative use cases that include authorize user, which is done by the system administrator actor, and log in, which is done by any system user who needs to log in. As of right now, I would anticipate that both students and instructors and system administrators would all have to be able to log in. So they would all play their natural role and also the role of system user. So that's the functionality that's in the system. Now let's get working on non-functional requirements. Okay, now we're actually ready to begin the authoring of the non-functional requirements section for the systems analysis document. And I've started out with a template file, template for non-functional requirements, which is just a Word document that I distribute to the students in my classes. And so we don't want to wipe that out. We want to save it as another name. So why don't we do a save as. And since this is the attendance system, we're going to want to save it as there we go. We're going to want to do proper save as. And let's just call it attendance system and then NFR for non-functional requirements. Okay. And now we have to start to customize this document. So instead of XXXX system, attendance system, non-functional requirements. And what we have here is an outline or hierarchy or a taxonomy of categories of non-functional requirements. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to use this in order to jog our memory as to what kind of non-functional requirements we should be thinking about. And we don't want to put down things haphazardly. We want to make sure it's important to remember that all the requirements for a system become important when we decide either to build or to buy or some combination thereof to actually implement the system. And of course, if we write down a lot of requirements that are not true requirements, we're going to unnecessarily constrain ourselves. So we don't want to do that. So what we want to do here is we want to write down the things that really are hard requirements. And if we have some nice to have kinds of things, then we probably ought to add those too. But we ought to distinguish those between the desired and the required. Okay? And the general approach that I take to this is I go through each of the areas and I either list a requirement or requirements or maybe a desired factor, or I say that there are no further requirements that we wish to add in this section. So you can go through it and see what we have in each of these areas in the way of requirements. So first of all, human factors. Let's take a look at that. Okay. So this is one of these things where we want to go. We want to go into 1.1.1, and let's say that our organization has usability standards. Okay, we see this is probably going to be a web app, and we have usability standards, and it's important that that we adhere to the usability standards that we teach in our program here at the university. So let's say this. So typically we begin with the system shall, and this is no exception. So the system shall conform to all usability standards taught in this university program. Okay, and so we're not going to say a particular university because, because we're not. Okay. Okay, and then we can say the system should serve as a positive example of that students may strive to emulate. So we're getting this. This should take care of us here. All right. So we're not real specific, but we are going to say that we don't want this to be a bad example. We want this to be a good example. And we're going to say similar thing for aesthetics. Oh, so it's not usability standards, it's human factor standards. Okay. And so let's essentially say the same thing with regard to aesthetics. Okay, so people are getting the idea here. Of course, there's no 1.2.2. And the same deal here for consistency in the user interface. So here, aesthetics standards. And of course, now we'll clone this into interface consistency standards. Okay. And we'll get rid of that. And online and context-sensitive help is an interesting thing, and I think we want some of that. So let's say this. The system shall include a custom help screen for each screen within the system on which the user may perform typical CRUD, C-R-U-D, functions. Okay, so that's create, retrieve, update, and delete. Okay. Simple display pages will not require a custom help screen. And that's because we're pretty well sure that people know how to use the kind of screens we're going to create. So we don't want to overdo it. Okay, so I'm not anticipating that there's going to be any wizards or agents associated with the system. So I'm just going to say no further requirements anticipated. Okay. User documentation. Okay. Now, the user documentation would include the help screens, and my thought is that the documentation for this system is going to be pretty light. Okay, and so I'm thinking that there are going to be two things. One is we're going to have the help screens, and two is I'd like us to provide a tutorial video. Okay. So we're just going to say C 1.4.1 above. Okay, that'll take care of the first point. And then in 1.6.2, let's say that we're going to have a demo video. Okay, so let's say a tutorial video will be created for students to help them learn how to use the system effectively. Okay, and we're seeing this being a short tutorial video, so maybe we'll just say that. Okay. And that's the only training materials that I'm anticipating because this is a system that I'm going to run. Okay. And I'm going to say C 1.6.2 above. All right, so that's it. Okay, so that's pretty good for usability stuff. Okay, let's look at reliability, frequency and severity of failure. Okay, well, can we tolerate? System shall fail no more frequently than once per week. Okay. Recoverability. System shall be recoverable within 1 hour. Predictability. I don't really see how predictability is going to be a particular issue here, except in a trivial sense. So I'm just going to say no further requirements anticipated. And accuracy, system shall be 100% accurate in its retention of attendance information that has been entered by student and confirmed by system. Okay, so if the system actually sends back a confirmation that the student has entered some attendance, I don't want things to roll back from there, okay, in a database sense. Okay, let's look at performance. Okay, now this is usually a case where I'm going to say, let's go to the next page. So let's insert a page break. So now we're top of the second page. So the speed, okay. I'd really like to get 1 second response time, but let's ask for 2 second response time. Okay. System screens shall exhibit 2 say no greater than 2 second response time. Okay, perhaps I'm being optimistic, but that's the kind of response that I want. Efficiency. Not really thinking of anything for efficiency right now. So I'm going to say no further requirements anticipated. Okay. Now throughput. Here is where I think it's a nice time to talk about simultaneous users. Okay. So the system shall support up to 70 simultaneous student users. And now the next one, the system shall support up to 5 simultaneous instructor users. I would imagine that the limits would be a lot higher than that. Okay, and now I'm seeing that my response time went into the wrong section. So, okay, that's fine. So we're going to cut that out of the top under efficiency and paste it in under response time. And that's looking good. So what would we be looking for speed rather than efficiency, rather than response time? And don't really know. So, as in all cases, I'm going to say no further requirements anticipated. Okay, right there. Now, let's look at supportability, testability, extensibility, maintainability, all those things. Now, I just want to point out that there's a lot of nice to haves here. Okay, but how much do we want to constrain the people who are going to decide what we're going to build or what we're going to buy? So if we're going to say something is a requirement, then we want to make sure that it's something that we're willing to commit to, or else we ought to say it's a preference. So for instance, on the testability, I think it's important to have some kind of testing framework associated with the system that allows for easy repetition of unit and integration tests. Something like the JUnit testing framework that's available for Java. And there are similar frameworks available for a lot of other languages. But again, if there's not, I don't want to throw a monkey wrench in the works, so I'm going to say is preferred. Okay, so the availability okay, so there is a preference for systems that will include a suite of unit and integration tests based on a testing framework such as JUnit. Okay? We're not saying it's required. We're saying that we'd like to be able to do it. Okay. Extensibility. Well, this has to be extensible because we're thinking we're going to add more functions. Okay. So the system must be extensible by building custom software that may share the same databases. Okay. Adaptability. I'm not really thinking of anything in particular here, so I'm going to give it the famous no further requirements anticipated. Okay. Maintainability. In terms of the maintainability, I've already talked about a testing framework. That's a big part of maintainability. The other thing would be that it's susceptible to version control. Okay, so something like the use of Git or Subversion. And so I'm going to say there is a preference for systems that will include the use of source code version control as provided in systems like Git or Subversion. Okay? So that's another nice to have. Compatibility. Well, let's imagine that all of the systems, well, most of the systems that I write are written in Java. Okay? So I'm going to express a preference for that here, but then again, it's not going to be a hard requirement because I don't want to get us in a corner where we want to buy something and we can't buy anything because we've committed to it has to be Java, and we can't find a system that's been written in Java, or people who are prepared to build one in Java. Okay, so there is a preference for systems developed using Java and JEE tools. The JEE stuff being the Java Enterprise Edition, let's say Java SC, Standard Edition, and Java Enterprise Edition tools. Okay, configurability. Okay, well, I would like this system to be configurable such that it could be used at more than one institution at the same time. Okay. And I see this as a requirement for me. So let's say this system shall be configurable such that courses taught at more than one institution may be serviced by the same system instance. Okay. Serviceability. Well, I don't see any real... the only thing that I would see here is that maybe we want a system to have requirements for uptime such that we have time to service it. Okay, so system shall be available. Shall actually unavailable at least 1 hour per day to allow for maintenance, upgrades, and repairs. Okay, so maybe that's not the perfect place to put that requirement, but it gets the idea there. Installability, I think I'm pretty good in installation. I'm just going to say no further requirements. I don't want to constrain us too much. And localizability has to do with the ability of the system to be customized easy for multiple languages, multiple natural languages like English, Spanish, Polish, Swedish. And we're just anticipating that it's going to be done in English. So at this time, only support for English, for, let's call it US English, is anticipated. Okay? And that's it. Okay, now, can we have non-functional requirements that are not part of these three groups? Yes, that's true. Okay? We can. So we create some more parts of the outline or the taxonomy, whatever you want to call it, and we find a home for them. Okay? So we definitely can have more. The trick here is to make sure that you don't make two common errors. Common error one is putting requirements in here that are really functional requirements. Okay, what behavior should the system have? Okay, if it has behavior, even if it's having to sign in, okay, that's functional behavior. All right. So what a lot of people do is they're typically doing the non-functional requirements after they've done things like use cases, and they go, well, I'm just going to put it here. Well, if it's a functional requirement, it doesn't belong here. Okay. These requirements have to do with the manner in which the functionality is provided. How usable is it? How reliable is it? How well does it perform? How supportable is it? Okay, so these are the character with which the system fulfills its functional requirements. Okay, so you don't want to make that mistake. And the other mistake that people make is something that we talked about while I was going through this list, is being able to differentiate between what's a requirement and what's a preference. This is a pretty good place to document your preferences, okay? But they should be explicitly labeled as such, okay? Because if it's not a deal breaker, then we ought to know it's not a deal breaker. We ought to know that these are nice to haves that we're looking for, but that we can live without them. If they're deal breakers, then they're requirements. So that's it. Then typically we save this and we turn it into a PDF, because in my classes we typically create all of our documents and turn them into PDFs, and then we assemble the PDFs with a tool like Adobe Acrobat Pro, and we get one giant pretty PDF systems analysis document. So I'm going to say goodbye until next time. Bye-bye.